Hi, my name is Chris Liversidge. I'm the CEO and founder at Queryclick. I've been asked by a number of our customers to talk a little bit about what Google announced in the I/O presentation just over a week ago now on AI mode and the implications for search. So I will take about 15 to 20 minutes of your time just to talk through it here. I intend to call out what the state of play is, share some data which helps us understand what we might be able to do to optimize towards AI-based searches in paid and organic, and then summarize back some actions. All of this is insight strategy that's been shared internally here at QC, and there's a lot of overlap with our existing strategy outcomes. So this should be a useful moment of your time. So AI mode has been launched in the US only. So you won't see AI mode in the UK or anywhere else in Europe right now. But you can see up on the screen on mobile and desktop what you would experience with AI mode. So it's intended to be accessed as something that you would select as an extra tab, a bit similar to news tabs or image tabs when you're performing a search, and obviously you're also getting prompted into using it when an AI overview is being triggered, as you can see here on the left. Now, there is an awful lot of discussion, potentially verging into hype around AI mode, but clearly we can see that Google is quite serious about attempting to adopt AI-based searching and trying to, at the very least, serve a segment of searchers who are more comfortable with that kind of engagement and environment. So let's just take a quick look at why we can be sure that Google is being very serious about AI mode. And the simplest answer to that is here. So you are already in a position where you can start placing ads against AI mode results when you're using PMax and also Google Max, which is being rolled out in beta at the moment and becoming active in most people's paid media accounts over the coming months. This means that you are much more easily, essentially at a click of a button, able to serve ads that would be eligible to be shown in AI mode results. So if you think about the way that Google's rolled this out, they've made the announcement in I/O and rolled out the experience to everyone in the US. But preceding that, they've already put in place the infrastructure for advertisers to place ads in those formats. Obviously, this is following on a continuing trend that Google has where it's attempting to make advertisers step back somewhat from the idea of using a key phrase as the kind of main vector around which you perform your optimization. We've certainly found that PMax, with a close eye kept on it and good trimming, works very well as part of the mix in campaign structures, excellent for discovery and so on. Broad, even to some extent, is much more powerful today than it was 3-4 years ago, and that's another extension of Google trying to take placements away from you being quite structured and refined and tightly integrated in the way that you would roll out your bid strategies. So we already have a way to buy and place ads easily without necessarily doing anything complicated in our ad sets, and that is one way we can be pretty sure that Google is quite serious about AI mode and testing. And I wouldn't expect to see AI mode go away anytime soon. And certainly because it's been rolled out as something that can be accessed as a separate tab, it may be that it's something that persists indefinitely, just as we've seen with, for example, image search. And image search, by the way, still represents something like 12% of all searches in Google today. They constantly talk about that when you pay attention to their posts and their help centers, and that just recognizes the fact that for most people they have different ways of searching when they're performing different actions. So The bull case for AI mode is that it becomes almost a replacement for the all tab, i.e. it's the default that you see. And the bear case is that it becomes a tab that you play around with for a bit, but perhaps you prefer the existing experience. And obviously that existing experience already has AI overviews in it and has had for some time. And we do have good data on that, which I'll dig into. So if we think about our existing interactions with AI in search, one of the principal things that stands out is, of course, the fact that AI overviews are being triggered much, much more frequently than they were even a month ago. And also I'll show some data in a second that shows that for some industries it's essentially completely dominant. But there's also a lot of interest in the idea that actually, although AI overviews have been sort of blamed for reducing click volumes, and it's definitely the case that they do interact with click volumes and potentially reduce click volumes, the idea of a search that doesn't generate a click is not a new one. This is a concept that has been in place and SEOs have been optimizing towards for nearly a decade now. Google brought in search features and snippets quite a long time ago. I'm long enough in the tooth to remember when Google Base was rolled out, which ultimately became the basis of things like map packs, local map packs, and was a way for you to just share essentially a database with Google and allow that to be triggered for sets of key phrase terms. Zero click, the idea of providing the answer within the search result page, aligns with what Google's always been advocating that it's trying to do, which is organize the world's information, make it easier to find answers to your questions. But what we can see definitely is that zero-click search is increasingly not the end of a searcher journey. And actually the availability of AI overviews can be triggering an increased volume in searches. What we can certainly say is true, as you can see here in this relatively recently sourced data set from Bain, is that AI overviews are already very frequent. So 40% of searchers are experiencing those AI summaries and relying on them to some extent already. So the rollout of AI mode is not necessarily a going from 0 to 100 moment. What we need to be paying attention to is how much of that 40% of the time gets increased up. We also clearly in the mix have lots of concerns and questions around the use of non-Google search engines. So I thought it'd be quite useful to just introduce a data set on that as well at this point. So AI overviews have a very low click-through rate. We've just discussed that. Averages out at something like 0.74% compared to an 8.63%. And that's sort of averaged overall for all results. I'll go into some breakdowns and industry segments later on. But if you compare that to separate AI platforms, they have incredibly low click-through rates. So essentially what that means is if you're using a dedicated AI platform, your interaction with websites or apps that are cited in those results is incredibly low. So it's lower indeed even than that click-through rate typically. And so there is a question that we get asked by some of our customers as to should we allow our site content to be scraped by some of those AI platforms. And I think the point I would make here is that we have to remember that although we may not immediately click through any of those results in those AI applications, it may be part of a longer journey that we are on as a potential customer. And so the idea of not wanting to be scraped to somehow protect yourself doesn't necessarily stand up to scrutiny when we look at the data. Allowing yourself to be scraped so that you can at least be part of the mix when it comes to AI solutions like Perplexity, for example, Anthropic, Claude, all these different properties that are not Google that have relatively significant AI volumes ChatGPT being the most obvious one. The argument is you should allow your content to be accessed by them. Really, unless you're a publisher, it should still be something that you can see as part of a user journey, and you should be looking to at least be part of the conversation as people are using these applications. If we come back into search results for a second, the other thing that I mentioned is that we've had AI overviews for a while. It's not just the case that that might increase your zero click volume, but actually it's also changing the behaviors that we have as searchers, as people using search engines. There's quite an interesting study that I've linked here, which is showing just for Americans, which is obviously where at the moment we have new data being generated by the launch of AI mode. This study is showing us that actually there's a trend that has emerged of high volumes of searches being made by reasonably large percentages of the population. So 34% in this example, all colored blue at the top of that chart. These are people making incredibly frequent searches every month, volumes of searches. So 101 to 250 being the largest of that cohort within a month. Part of this is being driven by the fact that when you get an AI overview, quite often you are then making another search. So you may be zero click on that AI overview, but you may then subsequently make another search, which does provide a click through to you on your website. And the stat that you can see on the left, Google just last month announced that the volume of searches they see in a year is now up at 5 trillion. So I just charted the actual publicly released numbers that Google's released over the years to give a sense of how much bigger that number is today than it was the last time we were given any kind of update from Google about searcher volumes. So you can say for sure somewhere around 2003, which is just towards the end of that, is when Google announced that they had 2 trillion searches going on. We're now at 5 trillion searches a year. So the step up there between the end of 2023, 2024, and now in the relatively early part of 2025 is enormous. So we're more than doubling to 5 trillion. And you can see that the trends previously, now this is obviously just on the dates where Google's announced their numbers, all the way back to 1999 when they had their first billion searches a year milestone, relatively flat through to 2008, and then suddenly going from 73 billion to 365 billion, so more than a billion a day, which was a real milestone for them a year later. That was a step change at the time, but actually, if anything, we're accelerating with the use of AI overviews. So this tells us that our search behavior as searchers is changing, and AI overviews, which is the major thing that's changed between 2024 and 2025, are definitely part of the mix and definitely influencing the way that we behave. The other thing that this is telling us is that there is an incredibly large volume of searches available for us to target from a paid media perspective and an organic search perspective. So even though you may see zero clicks increasing as a percentage, the overall volume, the absolute volume, is increasing at such a rate that we are likely to continue to see very good click volumes going forwards, at least if these trends continue. And here's another way to drill into the zero click behavior. So as well as there being an increased volume overall of absolute clicks, even within zero clicks, we can see a couple of different types of behavior. So this is another pretty interesting study, relatively recent, just from the end of 2024. And it's looking at European and American searcher behaviors, which are relatively equivalent. So I'll just talk through the American one here. If you make a search, typically what's happening, so 41 0.5% of the time, you are actually making a click. And there's a bit of a breakdown on the left there about what you do. When you make that click, most of the time, 70% of the time, in fact, you're going to an organic result. 28% of the time, you're going into another Google property of some kind. So, for example, YouTube, which is owned by Google. And their images and news, which I mentioned as search verticals, are already quite highly trafficked. So, for example, the fact that we've got such a high percentage of searches in Google Images, it's very likely because there is an equivalent map pack overview or image overview that you see to an AI overview. And that encourages you to actually click through into some of those results and drill into them a little bit and look through image search results, very much in the same way that we are being encouraged to do with AI mode. And so do we end up with that sort of 10% or so to 15% or so that you see with images? And we don't know what the percentage will be, but that's the behavior being illustrated here that's happening at least 28% of the time when someone clicks. And if we adjust for the fact that not all search results have a paid ad showing, we get about 5% of those clicks going through into an ad when someone clicks at the moment. So that leaves us with everything else. That's 58.5%. Those are zero-click searches. And actually, a very large percentage of the time, what happens next is another search. So within that 58.5%, you're talking about a reasonable volume. Somewhere around a third are actually performing another search, and it's only that overall 37.1% that doesn't then do anything, i.e., it's theoretically the end of their search journey for that session. Now, it may be that they start another session at a future date and begin searching again, and that's not being tracked by Google because it's on a different device, let's say. So even that 37% is highly likely to be a higher number than the reality when we consider our actual customers' behaviors. So we still have a lot of click volume and repeated searches occurring even when there's zero clicks. So when you're reading about zero clicks being driven up by AI mode, take them with a pinch of salt. It's making an assumption that that is the final and last thing someone does one AI search, and that doesn't appear to be the case whatsoever. So while we wait for more data to accrue, as AI mode is out in the wild in the US, and we can update and share a bit more about what those percentages end up falling at. What do we know already about AI overviews? How can we optimize for them? What are some of the practical things that we should consider? What's the data telling us? So if we look at AI overviews today, for which we have a good body of data now, there are some obvious standout trends and areas of insight that tell us what we should be doing. First up is your industry matters. It matters a lot. So in this Bridgewater report, we can see that for some categories, for example, here healthcare, education, and to some extent B2B tech, there is a very, very high proportion of AI overview results being triggered. So they are you need to be incredibly focused. Sorry, I think that broke out there slightly. So just to recap there, healthcare, education, and B2B tech are areas where you need to make sure that you're optimizing for AI overviews. You're getting a very, very high percentage of overviews being triggered in those sectors. And you're not seeing that quite so much in some other sectors, for example, restaurants. And funnily enough, travel is not necessarily as high as you might expect. When we think about those extra searches that people make after they've seen an AI overview, we can actually predict what kind of search that's going to be. We can see again in this same report that typically it's longer tail search terms that are being generated. So when we think about that increase from 2 trillion a year to 5 trillion a year, a big proportion of that will be mid and long tail search terms. Now, these are terms which are excellent to target because typically they are less competed against organically. And with a good content strategy and good targeting, you should be able to get content live and ranking relatively well, much more easily on a comparative basis than you would a shorter or head term. So if you're trying to target the word insurance, you're getting incredible volume and it's incredibly difficult to rank. But if you're targeting a 7-word term in the insurance sector, you have a much greater opportunity to rank if you have your ducks in a row and you know what you're doing. So mid and long tail terms are increasing in volume, and potentially AI mode will drive that adoption even more aggressively. And I think this is fascinating. This is my favorite bit of data I unearthed just pulling the research together for this piece. Funnily enough, most AI overviews already being served in Google are returning citations that are outside the top 10 ranked results. Now, we care a lot about being in the top 10 and particularly actually being in the top 3 organic results. That's because the vast majority of clicks go through those top 3 positions, something like 68% to 70%. And when you're outside the top 10, you're dropping down into single percentage points at best. So being able to create content and at least be within the top 100 and have that be something that's served right at the top of a search result as a cited link in an AI overview is an incredibly powerful technique that was not really available to us before we had AI overviews, and will certainly also be the case with AI mode as well. Now, we do see a lot of citations coming in. So, for example, sometimes you might trigger search results which give you tens and tens of citations. So there have been some where there's up to 60 citations, but we've seen that behavior is reducing as AI overviews have been tweaked to be a little bit more effective for searchers. So the fact that this has spiked, particularly after a recent core update that Google made, tells us that Google is very deliberately trying to find the right kind of content for those AI overviews, and it is looking a lot harder than it previously did, i.e. outside of the top 10 results. So we can expect to see much faster impact on content that's produced and made live, that's new, that's been outside of any ranking positions, but getting into the top 100 at the very least. So for a strategy point of view, this data point in combination with the fact that we see longer search terms getting indexed tells us that there's a strategic opportunity to create much deeper content more frequently, which uses the correct markup, and I'll come to that, to be ranked. And that will encourage an awful lot more engagement with, at the very least, AI overviews that generate subsequent searches, which may well involve your brand search term and therefore generate a click for you, or indeed a click, even though there's an AI overview being displayed. So that is a new optimization strategy that we can and should all be following. The other point I'd like to make here, while we're talking about key phrases and thinking about what is relevant, is that we also know, and have known for quite a long time, since in fact 2019, that Google has integrated machine learning methods of calculating the relevance and relationship between two sets of search term. So this is a process called vectorization, and it's used in a component of Google's ranking algorithm called BERT. And that was formally introduced into the algorithm in 2019 after extended period of testing. There's a schematic here, which is actually from the patent paper by the author of BERT. And this shows us essentially what the difference is between a kind of traditional way of thinking about key phrase relevancy and a way of associating the distance between two search terms using AI machine learning techniques. So this is the idea of vectorization. So calculating a score between 0 and 1 on the relationship between two words or two phrases. And that distance, that relationship being something that's used by search engines to associate search terms together rather than just a simple, straightforward lexical or classical way of associating the relationship between different words. Practically, that tells us that a classic strategy that we have all been using, certainly I've been using since I started my career in search optimization a long way back, so we're talking nearly 2 decades now. That tells us that the technique of trying to build focused pages around a single or very small set of key phrase terms and associating those terms together by clustering them. So essentially, this is what helps us generate this vectorized or this connective relationship that AI modeling creates. If we associate them together by putting them in a hub, which have good interlinking relationships, and also if we think about generating what those terms are that we want to associate together by reverse engineering the vectorization process. So we can take tools, process website data, process external site data, calculate literally a score between 0 and 1 of how related they are. And we can use that information to associate and build out the key phrase groups that we want to cluster content around. And given the previous points about the ability to more quickly get results returned in AI overviews and AI mode by just simply being within the top 100, and being able to be indexed. So I'll talk about the structural component of that. That gives you the two components required for your content to get indexed and returned more quickly and for a wider range of terms in AI overview modes and the current AI search results that you see here in the UK and Europe. So both those aspects of AI result generation benefit from this approach. So by tweaking the key phrase research technique, the strategies we use to generate which terms we should be targeting and how they should be clustered together, and also looking at which sites are linking to us and those content hubs, and making sure that we're identifying sites that have a nice vectorization score, i.e. are closely associated, not just semantically, but by this process of vectorization, we will have a very, very strong signal for search engines that our results are going to be highly relevant to be returned in AI overview results. And I mentioned indexability. My last 2 points are on that very, very issue. There are very good and well-established ways that you can communicate using the semantic structure of your code what a block of content is supposed to be about. You can identify if it's an FAQ piece of content, which will encourage a search engine to associate it with something that is an answer to a question. And all of these schemas are understood and publicized and bought into by essentially all the major search engines. And also we can see that they've influenced the way that the new AI application search engines are also operating. So if you make it easy for them to ingest your data and label it by using the correct schema, you are much more likely to more frequently come up and be cited because there's that extra confidence that this is going to be relevant content. So schema has gone from being important to critical and will increase the level of value that it offers over time. Perhaps less relevant for most people is a new emerging protocol as well that's certainly worth being aware of, especially if you're more of an enterprise brand and you are interested in finding ways that you can proactively provoke indexing in AI models and apps that are not just Google and Bing and so on. And that's by using this new model context protocol, or MCP, This is being touted as an alternative to scraping. It's something where you can actually provide a lot of that structured semantic markup live to those crawlers on demand. So essentially going from being passive and allowing your content to be crawled by, say, Perplexity, you can be proactive and create MCP responses, which are essentially just like RESTful APIs with all your data in the correct structure. So it can be ingested and trained by those models and also be available for those models to use when they are providing live read and response outcomes to queries. So most of you will be familiar with the idea that we now have more advanced AI models that will perform multiple stages of calculation before they are giving you a result. They will essentially show you their thinking, and these models will much more often than not be going back out for fresh content as part of that process, meaning they'll either live scrape a site or they'll be looking to try and use the model context protocol to pull your data in live in response. And that's particularly relevant if you have content that's meaningful in its freshness. So content that's around, say, stock price tickers. It's always going to be important for that to be available. If you have an aspect of your business where that freshness of content is highly relevant for accuracy and accurate answers, then this is absolutely an area to explore. And then a quick note on measurement before I move to summary points and takeaways. Measurement is currently still definitely in flux. We aren't currently getting really good information about impression volumes in Search Console, for example, in Google. Currently, actually, AI mode, as it's been launched, is explicitly not trackable. Google's going out of its way to stop people trying to understand what those behaviors are, what those event volumes are. It has gone on record to say it will make this data available in Search Console for AI mode. It intends to make it available in the same way it does for the other search verticals, so the likes of image, for example, meaning it won't necessarily be straightforward to get just what those search result behaviors are from Search Console data. But there's usually quite smart things we can do with segmentation to get a picture of that. So as soon as that is available, we'll look to do some follow-on analysis and share around thoughts. So some takeaways. I always like to try and be practical with these notes. So first up, I've covered in detail that actually search volume is increasing faster than you're seeing reductions in zero click. Except in some verticals, for example, healthcare and education categories. And clearly, all of this optimization is not relevant if you're a publisher. Publishers are really seeing a decimating loss in traffic volumes because they're in the business of providing answers to queries and live data. So you know, most of you will probably be aware there's something like 50% traffic drops going on if you're a publisher. So a very difficult industry to be in. And actually, a lot of the think pieces around AI mode and its massive impact on the web are driven by the fact that it's those publishers that are being affected the most. If you step back and think about your searcher journeys, then actually quite often what's happening is AI responses are part of your customer journey now. They're part of that searcher journey, what they do before they ultimately convert, whether that be into a lead or a transaction. And so being visible and making sure that you're targeting those increased volumes of terms is really important. So this is an opportunity. It's not a death knell for your traffic. That's very much not what the data is telling us. So develop evergreen content. That's rock solid strategy and has been for many years. Authority topics now can be reinforced by thinking about the vectorization, so the connection of those topics together, trying to become a discipline expert in different niches within your vertical is critical, always has been for SEO. And now we have the extra opportunity of being able to quite quickly get rankings returned into overview so we can bump ourselves up to the top of the results. So huge opportunity there. We should write our content in a form which encourages its use as an answer. So that is more of a copywriter adjustment, the way that we're creating content. We should be considering how it can be an answer when we're generating content for our sites. Content must be embedded in the relevant schema. That's table stakes. If you want to get included in any of these results, you could follow all the other advice I give, and if you don't make sure that your schema is right, you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back. So I strongly recommend that making schema the most important technical change on your list. Higher search volume terms are now really available for us to target because of the point I made about quite quickly finding those top 100 results being returned in snippets. So actually, from a wider key phrase strategy point of view on the paid and organic side, we should be looking for more aggressive opportunities and testing out on the paid media side if we can still see good impression volume from those subsequently coming through and converting in other channels. So that requires obviously things like good attribution, good measurement of all of your activity to take advantage of that. I do encourage that everyone takes a look at that side of things. But especially also on the organic side, those higher volume terms, we don't need to be in the top 3. We could just be in the top 100 and still be generating impressions that are part of a searcher journey. Longer tail terms, this is very, very true for paid and organic. Paid is always fighting against the drift upwards of CPC costs. So for example, over the last decade, Google CPCs have gone up by 150% or so, just on a standardized basis across all industries. It's going to continue to do that whilst they're a profit motive driven company. And everyone who's seen my webinars on the various court cases that they've lost recently and the disclosures made by their team tell us that they are actively increasing the cost per clicks that they charge to make sure that they meet their quarterly forecasts as a publicly listed company. So we know that costs are going up there. By being smarter about our targeting and moving towards some of those longer tail terms, we're going to capture some of that new 3 trillion new searches that have occurred between this year and 12 months ago. On-site activity should absolutely be supported by inbound that looks to generate relevant links that are associated with you semantically and through calculating that vectorization score. So looking beyond just your classic, is this site writing about the same thing as me, and going to the point of actually calculating what that score is. You will be surprised because you'll likely see some slightly different topics being very tightly associated. So it should broaden the scope there and allow us to assess backlink profiles and what we're doing with our outreach so that we can be much, much more effective there. And especially get that information out into our PR team's hands as well to help them better target, who they follow up with to try and encourage that linking activity. And then I would say my final point is this is a seismic change. Google is betting an awful lot on this, as are all of the AI providers. Tens of billions, even trillions being mooted by ChatGPT on their strategies. I would encourage you not to block their scrapers. I would encourage you to engage with innovations like the MCP. We should try and be in those stories, in those journeys, so that when that searcher behavior does move into more of a transactional phase, it might be our brand that they're searching on, and we are still ultimately going to be able to keep them as a customer. So that is everything I wanted to cover. Hopefully that's really helpful. Do please drop notes and questions, reach out to your account manager or directly to myself. It's a very important topic and we're certainly keeping an eye on it here at QC. Thank you very much for your time.